now available in paperback and e-readers. Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. The goddess next door takes on the threat of a deadly digital diva driven to destroy the world in this action-packed, all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess featuring a bonus pin-up and the other 2 books in the Cyber Goddess saga at online bookstores everywhere today. Better get the coleslaw, y'all, because we're having us a barbecue. I have a critical question I want to ask all of Comics YouTube. Is Comicsgate about going out and improving the quality of comics being published at companies like Marvel and DC? Or is it a gender war between male comic fans and female comic fans and the staffers who are male and female at comic book companies? Now, the reason I ask that critical question is because over the last 5 to 6 years, all I have heard is a back and forth between these comics YouTubers and the staffers at these companies, but I don't notice any actual change at these comic companies as related to the quality of the books or the sales as related to an increase in sales of comics at Marvel and DC. I just don't see any sort of change as related to things. Now, the reason why I ask if this is a gender war between comic fans who are male and comic fans who are female and staffers who are male and female is because the inciting incident for Comicsgate was this picture of the MilkShake girls over at Marvel. Now, this MilkShake picture was originally allegedly taken as several female staffers at Marvel, mostly white women and 1 black woman, decided to go and get some milkshakes to celebrate the life of Marvel editor Flo Steinberg, who had passed away recently. And as these women went to celebrate the life of the veteran staffer at Marvel, Heather Antos decided to post this picture on her Twitter. And once she posted this picture on her Twitter, this is what basically created a firestorm of controversy as related to many comic fans and many comics YouTubers. And that firestorm of controversy became the scandal known as Comicsgate. But when I take a further critical look at this entire inciting incident for Comicsgate, it's really reminding me a lot of the gender wars that started back in 2006 when black men came onto social media platforms like YouTube. Now, before 2006, black women basically controlled the entire narrative as related to black issues on platforms like the mainstream media. And as black women came on to platforms like the Oprah Winfrey Show, Jenny Jones, Ricky Lake, and even were featured in news media programs like 2020 and Primetime Live, they oftentimes spoke negatively about what they called trifling black men, whether it be in talk shows, again, like Oprah Winfrey or Ricky Lake or Jenny Jones, or in 2020 news broadcasts, or even in media like the publications like Terry McMillan's Waiting to Exhale. They often talked about how black men were not there to improve the quality of life in the black community, and how many black men abandoned their families, and also talked about how there were no good black men in the community. However, as black men started to speak for the first time and have a platform where they could speak for the first time, this was where many black men started to talk about black women and criticize them for their whole part in leading to the decline of the quality of life in the black community. And as those black men started to talk, they talked about how black women sided with the feminist movement and were looking to be a part of the welfare state because it was more economically secure than the black man's earnings and income due to white supremacy not making it where a black man's job was secure. And as black men started to explain their side of the story, this started the gender wars on YouTube. And the gender war was where black men and black women went back and forth with each other and are still in some cases going back and forth on YouTube regarding which gender is accountable for the sad state of affairs of the black community. Now, when I look at that whole picture of the MilkShake girls, the reason why I ask, is this part of a gender war, is because when I look at most of the guys who are complaining about the state of comics, they point to this picture as a whole reason why the quality at Marvel Comics went down back in 2017. Now, according to those males, mostly white males, they were upset because they saw these women in positions of power, and as they saw these white women and this one black woman in positions of power, and Sana Amanat, who wasn't in the picture but was the avatar for Kamala Khan's Ms. Marvel, they blame these white women for the decline in quality at Marvel, and this is where Comicsgate basically starts to mirror the gender wars that are on YouTube, and these gender wars basically are the thing that is leading to the back and forth as related to the finger pointing as related to the state of a sad state of affairs of comics. Now, as these sides go back and forth with each other on social media, we really don't see much of a solution being provided to ailing the issues that have really been a problem in the comic book industry for the last 30 years. No, we don't really see a solution to these problems, just another problem starting as related to the gender wars that have been going back and forth on YouTube. And as these gender wars have been going on back and forth, yes, many of the male content creators have been making money by saying how bad comics are because of these social justice warriors, as they call them, being hired to work in comics. But we don't really see things changing as related to sales, even though many of these content creators offer their own comics on crowdfunding platforms. We really don't see sales going up as related to these mainstream comics which keep comic shops open, nor do we see really much as related to actual growth of the market with many of these independent comics. No, we really don't see much change, but we hear a lot of back and forth as related to these gender wars. And like the gender war on YouTube between black men and black women, yes, you get a handful of content creators who go out here and make a lot of AdSense dollars and get clicks and views, but we really don't get to see much progress. No, we don't get to see much progress as related to the black discourse. No, the same thing is happening with this whole comic situation, and this comic situation is one that the actual solution is related to the entire hiring process. Now, as these sides have been going back and forth about how these editors are social justice warriors, I really see the real problem being the people who actually hired them. Now, many of these guys, they sit there and say they need to fire the MilkShake girls now, but what I really see the problem as related to the overall comic book industry with Marvel and DC is that they've had an infiltration of workplace simps, and these workplace simps basically ushered in this era of what they call woke, but I actually call an era of incompetence, an era of incompetence that actually didn't start with the MilkShake girls. It started way back in 2001 over at Marvel when they decided to hire Joe Quesada to become Marvel's new editor-in-chief, and at DC when they hired Dan Didio to become the publisher over at DC Comics. Now, neither of these men had actual publishing experience, and because neither of these men had publishing experience, they went out and made a lot of boneheaded decisions. And as they made boneheaded decisions, they basically started the decline of Marvel and DC Comics. Over at DC, Dan Didio, because he wanted to make DC Comics his way, went out and made major mistakes that a seasoned publisher would not make in canceling books that sold like Robin and Nightwing because he wanted to go in a different direction. Moreover, Didio also wanted to go out here and darken up DC Comics with books like Graduation Day and Identity Crisis, taking us away from the ideals of DC and taking us on a darker, grittier road of deconstructed storytelling. Whereas Joe Quesada over at Marvel started making similar boneheaded decisions, and as he made boneheaded decisions like going out and starting to follow Dan Didio with storylines like Civil War and books like New Avengers, this basically started the decline of both companies, and that decline of both companies as related to things started us down a road where everything was dark and dreary, and as things were getting dark and dreary, editorial did not have somebody who understood publishing, and because they did not have a seasoned hand that understood publishing, what happened was you got a lot of simps in the workplace looking to hire these women who were the MilkShake crew, and they hired the MilkShake crew because they did not have any leadership to impose standards on them as related to qualifications for work. And because they didn't have anybody there to impose standards as related to qualifications for working at Marvel, as related to having publishing experience, as related to having skills, as related to working on previous publications, this is how we got the MilkShake crew, who were out here creating books like the all-new, all-different Marvel, because oftentimes when you have unqualified women, it's usually grossly unqualified men who go out here and hire them. And while you have a lot of these guys on social media complaining, oh, these feminists got hired, well, these feminists wouldn't have gotten hired if it wasn't for a group of simp males going out here and looking to hire them in the first place. So when I look at this entire situation with the MilkShake crew, it basically started because of an age of incompetence that started right after Marvel started running into issues with its editorial, because I look at the year 2000 and I saw the editorial issue starting there with Kurt Busiek when he left Iron Man and that's where the start of the decline of Marvel started, really, because when Kurt Busiek left that book, Marvel editorial didn't have anybody there to transition to start a new run, and they first hired grossly unqualified writer Frank Thierry to write the book and put Alicia Martinez on as the artist, and that started that book going downhill. Same thing with Captain America. We had Mark Waid, who was on Cap, and then after Mark Waid left, they put Dan Jurgens on the book, and Dan really didn't have a good handle on Captain America, and those books started to decline, and the problems over at Marvel were really editorial. Same thing over at DC, but you'll have all of these guys who are part of Comics YouTube basically ignore the 2000s that came before, because they'll say, oh, sales were doing good. No, sales were starting to decline because there was no editorial to navigate and set a course for the publications, or lead the entire brand, or set standards for creators, or set qualifications for creators. And this is how these, what they call SJWs and activists, came in, because editorial did not set a standard or a guideline for the staffing that they allowed to be hired. And these simps basically were thinking more about the double D's in these women's sweaters, or the backside in their skirts. And as they were hiring these women, they were thinking about creating covert contracts where they hoped to possibly have a work girlfriend, or to go into the copy room, drop the skid mark jockey thong, and allow them to get a taste of the atomic waste from the atomic space. And this is what these guys were really thinking about, really not focused on creating quality books and not really thinking about hiring quality people to work for them. And when everything started to fall apart, what we got was a gender war where we've got many of these guys who are a part of groups like Comicsgate going back and forth with the female staffers over at places like Marvel and DC. And it's the readers who are the big losers at the end of the day. And it's the readers who are the big losers because over the last, I say, about 5 to 7 years, we have seen a major decline in terms of quality at Marvel and DC. And the reason why we see such a decline in quality in the comics produced at Marvel and DC is due to the inexperienced people who have been hired over at Marvel and DC. However, you'll have groups like Comicsgate go out here and try to inject politics into things to polarize the discussion. And as they inject politics into things to polarize it, they talk about the reason why many of these books are so-called woke or feminist is because of these staffers. But when I take that further critical look at this entire situation regarding these MilkShake girls, the reason why these MilkShake girls got hired is mainly because the individuals in charge were not seasoned, experienced people with publishing experience to understand that you have to hire people based on their skill set and their experience, not go out here and hire to meet so-called, what they call diversity quotas. And when I look at this whole situation, it's basically devolved into a gender war that where people are going back and forth. And as they go back and forth, just like what happened with the black gender war, we have a small group of contingent of individuals making lots of money on AdSense dollars and crowdfunding projects, but the big two basically still struggling, and that has led to the continuing closing of comic shops like Village Comics here in New York and Jim Hanley's Universe in Manhattan. We've seen major comic shops close because the books that are produced continue to be continuing of poor quality. And even though we've got these indie creators out here saying, oh, with our Kickstarters, we're going to save the comic book industry, I don't see it being saved the same way I see the black community, where we have this back and forth with the gender war, and it's not really impacting the black community in an effective manner. No, a handful of people make money from clicks and views, but comic shops still struggle and suffer while they continue to argue. And I remember watching one video where they're saying, well, we need to fire the MilkShake girls. Well, I don't think that's going to solve anything. No, what needs to happen is you've got to get the, as I call it, the simps out of editorial. And once you get the simps out of editorial, this will solve the problem, because it's the simps and inexperienced people that created the entire situation regarding the MilkShake girls, which created all of this controversy that these opportunists capitalized on, because it was a group of opportunists who wanted to capitalize on that photo to build their businesses. And they looked to use this photo of these grossly unqualified women to paint a picture of incompetence. Yes, a true picture of incompetence, because the books they were producing were hot garbage. But the reason why these individuals were able to produce books of hot garbage is based on who hired them, and who hired them is the problem nobody wants to talk about, because if we talk about who hired them, we see mostly white male faces, the same white male faces that run counter to the white males who are primarily the ones complaining about, as related to Comicsgate and the quality of comics. And as these individuals have been going back and forth, sadly what's happening is two things. One, we see comic shops closing all over the country and continuing to get worse as related to distribution of comics and access to comics. And two, we don't have any teaching of craft at these comic book publishers like Marvel and DC anymore, because there was a time when seasoned pros like John Romita Sr. and many others would sit down as part of editorial to teach inexperienced creators the craft of comics and comic storytelling, and that's basically being lost at this point. And it's being lost at this point as people go back and forth in this white male and white female, primarily gender war. And this gender war is one where they continue to go back and forth, and nothing really gets done towards saving the entire comic book industry. So when I look at this whole situation as related to the MilkShake girls, I look at the whole picture from a panoramic perspective. And as I look at it from a panoramic perspective, the problem doesn't start with the MilkShake girls in 2017. No, the problem started back in 2001, where Marvel really didn't have the editorial to transition books as related to guys like Kurt Busiek and Mark Waid leaving the titles and putting on a competent staff to continue their runs. That's where the problem started over at Marvel. And over at DC, it was the hiring of Dan Didio that basically started the decline of DC, which was running very well under Paul Levitz and Jeanette Kahn. But what happened was, when you hire an incompetent at the top, you get more incompetence at the mid and bottom levels, and this is what leads to the hiring of grossly unqualified individuals whose priorities are getting milkshakes and taking pictures of milkshakes on social media rather than promoting their books on social media and trying to reach people with their books the way I do here on the SJS Direct imprint. Now, when I'm on the SJS Direct imprint and you look at my Twitter, primarily it's focused on trying to sell books, and when you look at my Facebook, it's primarily on selling books, and even my YouTube, in every video I do, there are ads for the books. I mean, if these people who were a part of the MilkShake crew were about their business as editors, they would understand their paycheck was around selling Marvel Comics, but because the leadership gave them a pass and gave them no structure and no standards, what happened was you got girls taking pictures of them getting milkshakes, everybody going out at the same time to get milkshakes. This was signed off by incompetent leadership, because strong leadership would have been saying, yeah, I know you want to celebrate the pat of this editor who worked here, but you're not going to do it this way. I mean, don't put these pictures up on your social media. No, we don't need this right now. We need you to go out here and sell books. That would be the main focus. And if that was the main focus, many of the guys in Comicsgate wouldn't have anything to crow about as related to things, because I think a lot of those guys were upset that they didn't have those jobs, and they didn't get those jobs primarily because we have people focused on looking to hire based on gender. I saw this happen at the City University of New York when I was looking for work at hiring pools, and not looking to hire based on talent and skill. And again, that happens because you have workplace simps in place. And again, workplace simps, their priorities are not about taking care of business. It's about having social currency and trying to gain social favor with people. And if you've got that focus, you're not going to do well in business, because your focus isn't on moving product. So that's what I look at as related to the entire situation, as related to this entire thing. I mean, it's looking more and more like a gender war. And again, this gender war, like the one in the black community, is again helping people get clicks and views, like the clickbait articles that are posted by places like Comic Book Resources. But it's already sinking the industry, because books aren't selling, books aren't moving, people aren't talking about stories. I remember back in 2001 to 2007 or so, people were talking about stories, But once we started to get into the darker parts of Marvel with the Civil War and Dan Didio basically taking everything all violent and deconstructed, people stopped talking about runs and instead started talking about how bad things were. And that's where we are right now. The chatter basically is showing me that we're not focused on storytelling and craft and skill and these things that matter. And this is why comics aren't selling. But the whole thing is it's turned into a gender war between the white man and the white woman. And they want to control the narrative of comics. But the whole thing is, as they try to control the narrative of comics, comics is dying. And again, dying because it's turned into a gender war, and this gender war is one where we don't have any winners, and everybody is a loser at the end of the day. Now, my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, is available on Lulu.com right now, and you can get a paperback copy for the same price as it was on the 2022 Kickstarter. And if you want to pick up some of the action-packed fantasy fiction on the SJS Direct imprint that I promote every day on social media, you can find the books of the SJS Direct universe, such as the ISIS series, the Steam series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my black sorority novel, The Thetas, my black vampire novel, Eternal Night, or my black business novel, Recipe for Success. You can find those books along with much of my non-fiction and my screenplay books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find these books at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. And if you'd like to help me make the next SJS Direct Universe comic, or be able to help me be able to make more videos to stay on the air, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available on Lulu, John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes comic book. Get your copy of the first John Haynes comic at Lulu.com today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, The Temptation of John Haynes. Give in to temptation and pick up this action-packed African-American paranormal romance. Get The Temptation of John Haynes in paperback and e-readers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.